Hello, everybody. Welcome to this second session of the Start Online program. That today program, we will have the masterclass with Edouard Gasser, who has kindly accepted our invitation to talk about his own entrepreneurial journey, how he has co-founded Tilak Healthcare, and we'll know more about his success, his failure, really like how we really actually create this company. The idea of today is really to let you have a very concrete and precise idea of how Edouard started, even though his current company has already 6 years old, and that even he had another entrepreneurial adventure before and even a career. It will be the balance between where he is today, but where he started, because we really want you to have a mirror experience where you can find yourself also. And so maybe to start, Edouard, it would be nice still to know where you are now. So can you tell us what is Tilak Healthcare today? What is the size of it, and what do you do before we go back in the past?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. I'm super glad to actually exchange with you all, and then to give you a bit of background. So I don't come. Originally, I basically did a very I would say boring background. I did a prépa in France, and then I did a SCP like most of you now, but I kind of started in the technology world with the first internship in San Francisco in the tech industry, and I kind of fell in love with the whole industry, and more specifically the video game industry. And I started my career as a video game professional, and then eventually I started a company, and now which we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about certainly about it afterwards. And then I started Tilak. So just to give you a bit of background on Tilak, so at Tilak we create highly engaging, clinically validated medical mobile games to help monitor and rehabilitate patients affected by chronic diseases. So the motto of the company is "You play, we care." And we started with the first game that aims at monitoring patients that are affected by chronic eye disease of aging. I'm not going to get too much into the medical stuff, but in short, we're helping ophthalmologists monitor some patients that are at risk of losing sight. And through the game, we basically monitor visions remotely on their smartphones, and it helps optimize the healthcare process. And right now we're approximately 40 people in the company. It's been 6 years. We are generating a couple million euros in recurring revenue, and it's growing fast, especially recently because we got reimbursed by Social Security in France, which is obviously a huge booster. I'm not gonna lie, it took us a while, but right now it's kind of exploding in terms of usage and engagement, which is really exciting. But what I find exciting, it's less the results, but more the path, and this is what we're going to talk about today. I've been very fast at presenting the company and my career. My advice who helped me maybe by asking the right questions, because I'm sure that
yeah, of course. Maybe just you say you are 40. Can you tell us what are the typology of job in your company?
Yeah, so half of the company is basically product development. So you have game designers, game developers, online developers, cyber security experts, and artists that are basically working on the app and the game itself. And then we have 1/4 of the company that is on regulatory and medical aspects. So regulatory, it means that, because we're a medical device, we do have to follow a lot of norms and regulatory aspects. So we have people that are helping us, making sure that the product is safe for patients and doctors, which is the most important, obviously. And then another 1/4 of the company is, and obviously this team is also in charge of doing the clinical trials that prove the value from a medical standpoint, but also medico-economic point of view. So this is the regulatory and clinical team. And then we have another 1/4 of the team which is on marketing and customer success management, what we call doctor success management and patient success management, to make sure that they have the right experience, and also the people that are in charge of doing our business development and securing partnerships to make sure that we move forward and generate revenues eventually. So a lot of different people from very different backgrounds.
And who is buying the product? Directly the ophthalmologist?
No, it's well, that's the beauty of the model when you get reimbursed. That's the social security, which is the best customer you can have, because eventually it's a
but
big
before the social security reimbursed.
It's always been free for patients and doctors. It was through our commercial partnership with pharma companies that we basically started generating revenues.
Okay. So yeah, I will stop now on the Tilak Healthcare adventure, just to go back on your more personal entrepreneurial journey. And of course, we'll then at the end get back to the point here. Yeah. So to start, I'm curious if you can tell us about your first entrepreneurial journey. How did it happen? Because you used to be working in a video game company. And what led you start something? And what was that, and why did it stop?
So it was back in 2010. I started working in 2006, 2007 when I was still at ESCP, and I started working at a company called Gameloft, which is a leading mobile game publisher in France. And I started doing video game producing, and I enjoyed it. But after 3 years, I decided to start a company with a friend of mine who was kind of a genius in code. He had a super strong background from, like Stanford, Polytechnique. I mean, he was really, really, really strong. And I met him back at the time in Silicon Valley. So we kind of had the same idea of building something together. And eventually, when you're young and kind of a bit naive, you believe that it's going to be, the next big thing. So you're full of hope. And we started building a social commerce website, which is a website that was basically building trustworthy opinions around products. It was called Podcast at the time, and then Productism. And the idea was to share what you were buying with your friends, so that so that you could help your friends in deciding what to buy, whether it was books, it was I don't know, like a camera. What we were thinking is, and I think it still has a lot of value eventually, which is like, who better than your friends can, kind of advise you what you want to buy, because you choose your friend usually pretty well. And so, it was our idea. And so we were connecting Amazon, iTunes with your social network, and we were kind of sharing and basically doing discussions around product on that website. So it was super, super interesting at first, but eventually we got incubated in an incubator in France called Agora.
Maybe I start you already there. No, just to know, because so the last session we spoke about the importance of interviewing your potential users and discovering their needs, and then finding a way to test super fast. Yeah. How did you do this phase? How did you do it?
So for us, it was with friends and family, because the good thing is that if it was working for us, it would work for others. So the way we did it is that Julien, my co-founder, had already a prototype in hands, something that was super bare bone, but eventually that, like your friends could give you opinions about. And we had a couple of friends that were very tech savvy. So we decided first and foremost to check with them. And we had quite a good, good feedbacks from them, which helped us then move to a V2 version. But at first, I think that's very important. We wanted to iterate fast, because you have a lot of misconception about what people expect from your product eventually. And testing helps you kind of, make you move the needle quite fast. The problem when you kind of get stuck with your idea and don't get out with your product is that eventually your product doesn't meet your target. And I think it's Serge Gainsbourg who said, if ever you release your product when it's ready for your parents, then eventually it's not going to work. So the idea is, for us, it was, but we were coming from this very test and learn, background in Silicon Valley. You kind of do prototypes, you test on a very small community, which was our friends and our tech savvy, acquaintances in general. And that's how we started, in short.
And do you remember, for instance, some pivots you did from observing?
Yeah, I mean, quite fast we realized that we needed to, at first we wanted to just like add like a review of a product, and then a lot of a review of the product, and then people would put like or unlike or something like that. And then we realized that a lot of our friends wanted to discuss with the people that had bought the product, so we started to have comments, and we realized that the product was more like social discussions around product than actually pure review of products, trusted reviews. And that made us like realize that the beauty of the platform was to engage and eventually create real discussions, which was not the case at the time. I mean, I remember using TripAdvisor and such, and you didn't have really like those conversations basically. And so we kind of removed that restriction, and it helped us a lot eventually, because a lot of our friends told us like, it's great, I meet people through your network and I can discuss about the product and everything. So it made us change quite fast, and it was the core of the product, so it was quite useful.
And so how did it go, and why did it stop? Because it lasts 1 year, right?
Yeah, it lasted 1 year. So 3 months, it was like, you know, kind of the perfect start. We got incubated in one of the major, you know, Paris incubator at the time, which was Agoranov. We had a really strong tech that was interesting to a lot of companies. We started securing commercial partnership. I remember at the time it was Pixmania. We had an affiliate partnership with Amazon and iTunes, so it was good. We started to have a bit of press also, at least at our level. It was like Presse Citron, Madines. I mean, you know, there was a couple of articles. At the same time, also, I was involved with TechCrunch, so we got coverage. It was good for the first like 4 to 5 months, I would say, really good. And then we started realizing that we needed to expand and have more users in general, because we had a good community of, I would say, like 200, 300, like, you know, very active people. But eventually, we realized that we needed to do a bit of acquisition for more people in general. And that's when we started to see like the limits of what we were building. Our friends, ultimately, they were kind of, you know, like helping at first, and then realized that it was working really well for them. But eventually, like the engagement, the first 5 minutes were not super engaging, and it was hard for us to get like new customers and people outside of our friends network. And so we started to have disagreement with my co-founder, and eventually that's when things started to go south. Not like, it was not war at all, but just disagreements, one after another. And eventually at the end of the year in 2010, we realized I said like, we need acquisition. And in order to do acquisition, we need to build a better product and eventually raise money. And then he told me like, I prefer to be focused on technology and eventually sell the technology, because I want to have, I mean, we had a different vision, in short. He wanted to make the most out of the technology I had built, and me, the value that I was seeing was more in the platform and the community and what it would bring to customers. And eventually, this is when we started to part ways, because we didn't have traction, and we didn't agree early on what do we do when it goes south, in short. What do we do when things don't go as planned?
You you created the company, right?
Yeah.
And you did the pacte comment tu dis le pacte d'actionnaire en anglais?
Yeah, the shareholder agreement. Yeah, we did, and we had, yes, but the shareholder agreement is very late. I mean, for me, it's a very late. It has a lot of legal perspective, right?
Yeah, it does.
And I think that prior to shareholder agreement, you need to do like what we call like, you know, gentlewoman and gentleman's agreement, kind of like in a sense that you do need to set rules on how do you want to work together? What is the rhythm? You know, like both of us were working remotely, and at the time it was like literally not as, you know, like developed as today. So it was a challenge, especially during vacation, I remember. Second, I think that it's important to lay rules on what is the vision of the product, where you want to bring it, and how you want to work towards it, because otherwise, when the vision is not aligned, eventually everything goes south. And I realized afterwards that I jumped on board with him. We wanted to build something. At the time, I think it was Social Network that got out in 2009 or 2008. I can't remember. We're coming out of the Silicon Valley. We were full of hopes. And like many people, we thought that given our background, one that did SCP, the other that did Polytechnique, we would raise money super fast and it would explode, like everybody's telling us in the movies and everything. And eventually, it's a lot harder than it seems, and it's a lot more iterative. And you need to have really, really strong basis and a good agreement between people early on, to make sure that when it goes south, you can still work together towards a common goal.
And so, how were you organized to? Because when you start a project, we discussed that when we had our call yesterday to prepare the discussion. You don't really know what to prioritize. You can have the fear of the emptiness of your agenda, or be working too much on not essential elements. So at that time, who were you working together, and maybe what didn't you do that would have helped you to be more aligned more regularly, maybe by having a backstep regularly and not being in the
it's a really good question. At the time, we did not set a clear discipline, and it made us lost a bit track of where we were in general. I really wanted to have a space together where we would work together to create a bit of of a planning. At least, I mean, the idea was not to fill with meetings, but just to be together to kind of exchange ideas and everything. And he was more of a lone wolf, if I may say. He was coming from a coding background and really liked to work at home, very in his own private space. And eventually, it made us on a different. I mean, it made us on a very different schedule, basically. And so we lost that kind of energy that we had at the beginning, because we were not always together in the same space, and we lost communication at some point. We didn't have the right vision together, and we lost communication, and eventually it went the wrong way, which is something that I said very differently when I started Tilak.
And at that time, did you had some mentors, or you were mentioning Agoranov, or any people around you that were also maybe telling you that you had to be cautious about certain things and that you didn't listen to because just it was at that time not obvious for you? Or were you supported, or were you a bit alone in the process?
I mean, I think that we were, at the time, it was 2010, the French Tech was barely starting. You remember it was the first or the second year of the Blue Factory, if I recall properly. There was only a few ecosystem and not a lot of knowledge sharing around entrepreneurship in general. Everybody was going to Silicon Sentier. The camping was not there. There was not a lot of things. So eventually we're relying on other entrepreneurs that eventually became super successful, which is absolutely awesome. We were working with people from Lydia. It was Cyril Chiche and Antoine Porte that were in the same space. There was also Julien Sylvain, who was a multi-entrepreneur already at the time. So we're trying to gather from other people, but there were no rules. It was a lot less obvious. And I think we were a lot younger also. So maybe a bit prouder, in a sense that we would believe that, we were kind of the new kids on the block, and eventually it would work out for us. I think that when you grow older and you have a bit more experience, you realize that the best way to not fail is to ask tons of questions, tons and tons of questions to tons of people. And the one thing that you should not do when you're starting an entrepreneur, journey, is to be very secretive about what you do and to not share what you're doing with peers and people that are not that are in your environment. I think that sharing and asking questions is the best thing, because eventually there are a lot more people that know more than you, and still today, I mean, there are so many people that know a lot more than me. I'm asking more questions now than I was asking questions at the time, and I think that's the mistakes that we did basically.
But then you still have to be your own captain and not maybe listen to every advice, because it can be a bit turning you around.
No, that's very true. But you have to take feedbacks for what they are. Feedbacks are just opinions, right? But then you need to have that driving force that leads your way. I mean, that's also why, you know, like when we do like consumer testing, and when we have patients that are basically testing, giving feedbacks, we don't take feedbacks for granted. We analyze the way, the context, and how they basically express their concerns or their feedback. And I think that's very important, is that you need to be critical about what you receive. You need to receive a lot of information, but you need to be able to analyze it properly. You're right. I mean, you need to have one vision and then iterate, and basically get the feedbacks that you feel useful and remove the ones that are not useful. That happens also, that's for sure.
And how did you, at that time, with this project, and then we'll move on Tilak, how were you able to support yourself in terms of eating, sleeping, living?
So there was a beauty called Plein Emploi, Pôle Emploi, sorry, that basically helped us for
Unemployment.
unemployment. I mean, we were both unemployed and eventually lived on that for a full year. And yeah, we didn't pay ourselves anything. We had a bit of help from Agoranov, which was, I think, 30,000 euros. So it barely pays your rent and your servers for a year. That's what it does. And yeah, that was it. It was really like super bootstrapped. But fortunately enough, I was still receiving Pôle Emploi and Julien too at the time. So it helped us, you know, like move forward.
And you were doing turnover? Were you selling things so fast?
Yeah, but everything was reinvested. I think that we made, I don't know, like 50 or 60K during that time. So not that much, to be honest. We were building, and it was very at the time, it was very trendy to build communities more than building a business, which is still valid in some cases, but I think that it was just what we were looking for.
Okay, and so how did it happen when you had to decide to stop? Because it's always a bit hard to know, like, okay, do we continue? Do we stop? Do we continue? I mean, if you were disagreeing with your associate, maybe it was kind of obvious we stop. But
so we brought after 6 or 7 months, we brought someone else in the company, a third person that had also a technical background, but was more pragmatic than Julien. Who became then the CTO of a very successful company, actually. And after 3 to 4 months, we realized that so I was pretty much in line with with this new person, and we basically talked to Julien, who was the CEO and who was the one that was, that had the idea and the technology, and we told him, like, either we move in that direction or it's not going to work, and we decided to part ways at that moment. Basically, because
who did you find this new associate? Who did you find this person, the third one?
It's always through network, and it was someone that had that Julien knew and that I knew from other people, and that was eager to join basically a startup at the time.
Because I know there are many participants that wonder, like, how do you find your associate when you want to find one?
Well, it's always a matter of it's asking around, right? I mean, your network is your strongest asset, especially when you have a SCP. It's a strong asset in general. I mean, so use that network. Use that network a lot, and don't hesitate to ask questions. Don't hesitate to put on. Now you have LinkedIn that is super powerful. I mean, at the time it was nowhere. I mean, we were basically posting stuff on Facebook and hoping that it was being shared in general. It was it was very fun, but pretty challenging. So I mean, if you have already a strong network, don't hesitate to activate it through LinkedIn. And people, I think that most people are really extremely extremely supportive when you start an entrepreneurial journey, because a lot of people realize how hard it is. So don't hesitate to ask in general.
Yeah. And so you had to close the company. So yeah, you have to close it properly, right?
Yeah, we closed it. So there was not a lot of money involved in general. We closed it. So I think that Julien kept the SAS alive and eventually sold the technology, but it was we closed the company and eventually it faded away. And then I moved back in the video game industry. So I moved back at Gameloft, but I wanted to get out of France, so I moved to the US for 2 years, and then moved back in Europe, in Spain for 4 years before starting Tilak.
And when you went back to the gaming industry, you knew you would like to start another company afterwards, later on? You didn't know? You were tired?
I don't know. I had other objectives in general. At the time, so you never say never, but I think that I had to go through my journey in general at Gameloft. So I started as a video game producer, then eventually became head of production in the US, which had a lot of value for me, and I wanted to become a creation studio manager. So then I moved back to Spain, and I became the studio manager of the Gameloft Madrid studio, which moved from 60 people to 120 people under management at the time. And I was completely happy with it. And then eventually there was a hostile takeover of my company by Vivendi, which changed a lot. And this is something that is important. It changed a lot my relationship with management, because usually what happens is that you put your trust in people in general, whether it is through entrepreneurial journey or through a more traditional corporate path. And when there was this hostile takeover, it changed completely the management structure, and eventually the people that I trusted left the company, and I felt it. But I had nothing against Vivendi and against the fact that they were buying the company, but I felt that there was no journey for me anymore over there. And eventually, that's when I met my co-founder in France for Tilak, and that's how Tilak started. Incongruence is usually the best asset for innovation. I mean, meeting people is just the way you innovate.
How did you meet these co-founders then?
So it was quite random, to be honest. Again, through a networking opportunity, someone contacted me and told me there is this professor of ophthalmology that is looking for someone that knows about gaming to create a new company that would help patients and optimize their healthcare process. And maybe because I had this entrepreneurial background and DNA, this person basically asked me if I would be interested. And I was, it's always like time to market, but I was at a moment where I wanted something new, and it was fun. This person was, really high profile ophthalmologist, so it was intellectually very stimulating for me. And eventually we had that discussion, and I said, okay, this is my mission now. So let's build it together, and that's
with
how.
One discussion?
I mean, it was like 2 hours. Absolutely. But then, you have to, it's kind of for me, meeting people is usually like an opportunity by itself. And when you have the chance to exchange with someone that high profile, because it's really the Pope of ophthalmology in France. He's now the head of the ophthalmology department at the University of Pittsburgh in the US. You realize that you don't have that many chances to meet with someone that is that interesting, that gives you his trust and is eager to build something with you. So eventually I said, like, let's go.
And once in a lifetime occasion.
Yeah. Well, until the next one, right?
And so that was 6 years ago. And if we are back into this idea of how did you start, who was the prototyping? Maybe how did you test the solution? Or because I guess that the guy came with a lot of intuitions and hypotheses and vision. But
So
yeah, how did you start?
So he had obviously he had a lot figured out when it comes to the idea, when it comes to the healthcare process, how the product could optimize the vision of his patients. He also was working with the Vision Institute, where they had a team over there that were able to do prototypes and such. And so he told me, but I know nothing about digital and I know nothing about gaming in general. So I need someone that is eager to operate, to manage, to go with me in this adventure. And so I started, I remember it was on November 7th, 2016. I was in front of my computer and I'm like, okay, now we need to prototype. So what do I do? And, you kind of have this emptiness feeling, like I don't know where to start. I think the best is just to be very iterative and start posting jobs, start finding associates, start trying to define what is the technology you're going to use, what is the type of profiles you're going to need. It needs to be very iterative, and it's normal at the very beginning to be kind of lost. You're not going to build a 1 million, 10 million, 100 million, or $1 billion company from the start. It takes a while, and especially when you're entering the healthcare industry in general, you have a lot of things to apprehend and to understand. And so at first I started asking questions, obviously to him, but also to the people around him, and then to the people I knew from the gaming industry that would be interested to join eventually the company if it was moving forward. And it helped me kind of, starting building the idea, first a pitch deck, then a prototype. Pitch deck, it took me a week. Prototyping took me another 2 months, 3 months.
What did you prototype? What did you prototype? You prototyped yourself?
So a bit. But
like you have tools for that, like easy accessible tools to prototype?
Yeah, well, now more and more. With the no code platforms, you can do a lot. At the time, no, but I had a bit of knowledge of coding myself, and I knew that for mobile gaming, Unity was the perfect platform. You have a lot of tutorials, so I started to do tutorial. Eventually, I asked some people to bet also on what we were building, because I had already strong leads through pitch decks and through his network for potential investors. We knew we were going to need investors, because in the healthcare industry, you need investors to do clinical trials. So the first 3 months, I had like some crazy students that bet on the pitch decks that I presented to them, and former employees of myself that decided to bet on me, and 4 to 6 months after the start of this period, we raised money, and then we continued. It was another thing.
And did you use the prototype to raise the money, to convince them? Did you show them only slides, or did you show them a bit of a product?
So I had slides. So I basically build a lot upon my experience as a gamer, and obviously the experience of Professor Sahel on the medical side. So I basically presented the company through ourselves, like one coming from the gaming industry, a seasoned gaming producer, and on the other side, an ophthalmologist. And then, yes, I had a prototype, but the prototype was just, it was nothing, right? It was just a glimpse of what the game could be, and people loved the idea. Unfortunately, we had really, really strong backers from the start.
But do you think it helped? Because our all like what we say to all the participants, and then your point of view on this is very important, is that they can prototype even in a very, very simple way, but just at least to show how it works, and to show eventually that it has an impact, and that can motivate investors to see that they're able to build something. You were able to build a first company, even if it failed, so that's also an asset that you had. But what's your experience on that?
So yeah, if it depends on the complexity of the product. When you're building a mini nuclear reactor, it's going to be complicated to build a prototype that doesn't explode and kill people, basically. But what I'm saying is that you need to have, if that's the case, if you're doing something very industrial, you need to show that you're able to execute. And so that means that you're already mapping out the technology behind, and you have strong assets that you can already show. It doesn't have to be a prototype, but it has to be, in the end, people are, I mean, investing or buying, I mean, it's the same thing, right? I don't think that you have to fundraise. Sometimes you have to because you need money, especially in our case. We needed to do clinical trials. You cannot put something in the hands of the patients and in the hands of the doctors if it's not clinically validated, if it's not regulatory approved. So eventually you have those entry barriers that require a bit of financing, right? But in some cases, you don't have to. And I think it's always valuable to show that you have a great idea, that you're already executing, that you already have a force in you that is, you know, like driving you and already making you executing things that others cannot do. And then you need to meet the right people to convince them. But it's the same for investors and buyers. Eventually, they are betting on you, especially at the start of an entrepreneurial journey. So you have to convince through everything that you can. If you have a prototype, it's great. If you have a lot of experience, build on your experience and share your experience and show that your experience is not for granted, and that, you know, it's going to be an amazing asset to what you're building. Yeah, and eventually what you're selling is as important to your employees, also your future employees or your future founders or your future associates. So it's always the same thing. Is like, consider that the people in front of you, they don't know a thing about what you do, and eventually they see you as the one person that is going to carry that idea to the next step, and be very, very iterative eventually. I think that's important. I mean, we talked about it. For me, it's, you need to be very idealistic about your vision and very pragmatic about the way you execute.
In Tilak, for instance, can you give us an example of an iteration, like a crucial iteration you had to do?
So yeah, it was a bit further away, but basically my approach was, I want to go super fast to the market to show that people that are on average age 75 can play video games. Because, you know, when you're building a game that aims at monitoring patients affected by chronic eye disease of aging, that means that they are fairly old. And the first reaction of people was, but old people don't play video games. And I say, okay, you'll see. So I basically, what we did, and most of the people were telling you, you're completely crazy. You should first do a full clinical trial. You should first go through the full regulatory approval. But fortunately enough, after 8 months, which is approximately 5 to 6 times shorter than what most people do usually in the healthcare world, we went to a group of users and a group of ophthalmologists that agreed to follow us and to test the application. And what we showed is that there was really good engagement rate, really good usage, and eventually that people that were 75 years old were super eager and keen on playing a video game to monitor their vision. And it changed everything, because most of our competitors, they go through regulatory approval, clinical validation. It takes them like 3 years to go to market, right? Without any idea of how, you know, the game or the application will be played or used in the real world. And that's one of the biggest issues that you can see in the healthcare world. So eventually they build something that seems efficient in clinical trial. But in clinical trial, people get paid and eventually are incentivized to use your product. When you get to the real world and you need people to be autonomous, it's not the same. And I think that's something that helped us be a lot more credible. I mean, to build a lot more credibility on the way to execute a very hybrid product that is in between medical and digital than most of our competitors. And it's still helping us today after 6 years.
So this was built really on your own intuition, right?
This was built on my experience more than intuition. To be honest, I think that I would have been the same as them if I didn't have my experience from the gaming world, where it's so competitive and it's a pirate industry that if you don't test and learn in the gaming world and you don't have the right KPI in terms of usage and engagement, then eventually you fail. So it was more like, I mean, if we want to survive, I need to make sure that my customers will play the game. And most of the investors are saying, investors or customers or potential buyers or whoever we were meeting at the time, they were saying, but no one is going to play the game. And it's the same, and it's actually funny that 6 years later say, yeah, I really liked your idea at first. And I'm like, yeah, but you said so. I mean, you know, like, so for me, do not expect people to validate your idea, show them. That's why a prototype is important. That's why iterating is important, because eventually, and I'll be frank, and it's the same, I'm going to give you feedbacks about your project, potentially, sometimes if you want to. I'm certainly going to be saying stupid stuff, right? And don't expect, I mean, investors, buyers, I mean, I remember having discussion with people from the pharma industry. They did not buy into the whole video game idea that was, you know, creating engagement and adoption for elderly people. But I knew at the time that there were more mobile gamers that were over 50 than mobile gamers that were in between 12 years old and 30 years old. That is the kind of information that they didn't have. So I knew that I had basically an edge and something that, you know, like they didn't know. So if I were to build a rational and show them that they were wrong, then the message would be like a lot more powerful.
And maybe a last question, and then we will move to the Q&A, which is a big question. It's like, what in Tilak did you do differently from your learnings of the previous company? You said there are several stuff you did differently. I guess the relationship with your associates maybe, or what were the main things that you really start differently?
Yeah, so the first thing I did is what I call the golden rules. So I set, when I had the first employees and the co-founders, we basically did a 2 days workshop where we set golden rules on what do we want to do, how do we want to work, and then we derived from that like 7 working habits that we need to have, which is, for example, document everything. Everything should be great and not okay. Okay is the enemy of great. I mean, those type of stuff that seem obvious, but eventually it gives you a guideline. I can show you. I'll show you. It's even more powerful. I think if I can share, if I can find it.
Yes, you can share, of course.
I can. So where is it? Yes, I think I have it. It's still the same document that I use. I usually use it. Okay, general. Golden rule, is that here? Let me find it. I'm sorry, it takes a bit of time.
No worries, take your time. In the meantime, you can put your question in the chat. So
yes, absolutely. No, but those are the yeah, I find it. Okay. So I opened it. Okay, perfect. Let me show you. It's very useful. So I would basically, I mean, if you can all do that, I think it's very powerful. So this is an internal document.
Wow, that's the first time it happened during a masterclass of Start Online. So I must say.
Cool. So for us, there was 3 core values. The first one was it needs to be fun for us so that it's fun for them. If you don't like your product and you're not playing it, then basically it's not going to work. It needs to be simple and accessible because it was for kids and elderly. So I don't want to build a StarCraft or obviously something that is impossible to play for people that are not digital native. And the third one was flawless, whether it is in terms of graphics, design, medical claim, or development. The experience needs to be perfect and deliver clinical data. Science do not compromise, art neither. Good enough is the enemy of great. And then based on that, we had 7 golden rules. The first one is nothing is okay, everything should be great. It seems obvious, but a lot of people, I have arguments with people that are telling me, oh, but that's okay. The patients, they're not gonna even remember that. And actually it's wrong. It's not right. Second one is work as a team. Nothing is individual. So communicate. The first thing that I did was to implement, I mean, all the tools you can have. So Notion for the documentation and Slack, for example, to communicate with your team. Care about users' feedbacks, but avoid a too subjective approach unless you have good reasons to do so. So always ask questions. The fourth one is always provide constructive feedbacks. If you disagree, propose a plan or solution. There is nothing more frustrating than someone always complaining and never proactively resolving the issues. So for me, it was like, I put it in the right way, but avoid being a smart ass. In short, that's the worst in a company. And I've seen that. I had 120 employees. And in short, you always have 10% of those employees that are smart asses in general. That's the statistics that I've built over time. So that means that in my at Gameloft, I had 12 people, and I can still remember their names that were a pain to manage. And that's so. I think that's important when you're a short team to avoid being that person. 5, be flexible and productive, and it means. And it's related to the 6th one, which is do not be afraid to make U-turn. I know that sometimes you work on stuff that you've worked super hard and it takes ages to build, but eventually it doesn't work. It's okay, right? There are many things that fail eventually. Speak out loud when something frustrates you. That's also something, I mean, it depends on the personalities, but it's something that I'm always telling to people is something that is the worst is basically build frustration over time. And eventually there's something that gets in your way and move you away from working productively. And then document what you do and read documents provided by others, because you don't know how long you're going to last in that company eventually. And I think that it's important in terms of transition to onboard new people and also to offboard the people, because sometimes, like people come and go. For example, in our case, we I mean, there are a lot of people that at some point, because we're scaling differently from what they wanted, are leaving the company in good terms. But it's important that, they document properly so that the people that are coming, afterwards can follow up on what they build upon. So yes, this is something that I did not do in the past, and it was super powerful. The third one was I was coming from a gaming industry where crunch was absolutely awful. And I said I had 2 kids at the time, and now I have 3. I said I need to be able to basically have dinner every night with my kids, at least almost every day, which I do. And if it doesn't work, then eventually it means that I'm not good at what I do, and I should not do that. I think it's important. I live in Fontainebleau. I moved before COVID, because I wanted to have a space where I can separate like entirely my personal life and my professional life. And basically, when I arrived in Fontainebleau, and I live on the countryside, really, I feel like I'm on vacation. And I think it's super important to have a safe space, because sometimes in an entrepreneur journey, you will face many challenges and you will have a high level of stress. If you don't have a space where you can completely forget about your job, then that's awesome. And even if you work remotely from home, have a space at home where it's completely, like the place you work, and not, the place where you live and work, because it becomes complicated. I know it's challenging in Paris, because we all have, I've had like very small spaces in general, but then go to a Blue Factory and work from SCP. That's also really cool.
And what you said about just the frustration part, the fact of saying frustration, what do you set up in your organization that allow this space for speech? Because you can say it's nice to speak out loud, but at the same time, if it's all, yeah.
No, so there are morning stand-ups in each of the teams where everybody is saying, what he's doing and how is he blocked or she blocked, and what is going wrong or right. We have 360 feedbacks for employees also to give feedbacks about their managers and make sure that they can express what is going wrong. We have Slack where people can obviously express themselves. Then we have the regular evaluation, but do those things right from the beginning. Don't expect this not happening in a small team. I think that right from the start you need to have really, really solid rules around that. And we also have, we've put up in place a mental health plan through mocha.care, so that people feel, like They have external people also they can talk to discuss about stress, about management, family, work, and stuff like that, so that it's not coming from the company and stays inside the company. I think it's important that they have that free speech area where they can a bit vent what's happening. And yeah, I mean, for me, it was that all those
and
kind of stuff.
your own alignment to close on my side, and then Manuela, I will let you maybe say about the question you see in the chat for about the alignment, because you said like your previous company was in a way having difficulty because associates were not aligned of where you wanted to take the company.
Yeah.
Today, is it something you work on and maybe you update regularly, because you like life is surprises, so you cannot just say, okay, I'm going there and I go there. It's, you said you were in a teenager phase of the
Yeah.
company.
Yeah, so now it's more like I think that in the company I've at least with the people I'm closely working with, we've built, I mean, I've been working with them for a while, and we've built something that is pretty good, which is every week we have like, you know, a directors meeting where we basically speak about what's happening in each of the team, and we are always very transparent about how we feel and where we are in terms of level of stress and in terms of what is concerning us. It's a lot harder with external stakeholders like investors, and because there's always this, you know, like relationship that is, I mean, it depends on the people you're working with, but through hard times, I've experienced like, you know, board meetings that were really challenging, in short. Not because what we were doing were not moving forward, but they also have their level of stress, and sometimes you don't understand why they are super stressed and why they are putting so much pressure on you, and, you know, like, so those type of stuff I'm still building. I'm still, you know, trying to find the right way to communicate properly with external stakeholders so that there is no like dead angles, if I may say. But yeah, I mean, be very cautious about that, because it can go south very quickly. Like, you know, like I mean, once a relationship starts to, you know, once the trust starts to fade a bit, you have to react quite fast. Otherwise, there's something that is really that can really break the entire dynamic. And we also had, I mean, I'll be honest with you, we also had to let some people go because they were ruining the collective in general. And that is also hard from a, you know, like from a manager perspective, is to be able to understand that even individuals are less important than the collective in general. When you're talking about teenage time, in our case, it's more like the company sometimes is trying to tell me stuff that I'm not expecting. It's like a kid that is basically growing up and wants a tattoo when you're against tattoos in general. And so the idea here is to understand why and to maybe let it be, so that it brings something new to the table. And this is hard when you're a protective parent or a protective founder. You always believe that you have the right solution, but it's not true. Sometimes you have people that are bringing a tremendous energy and giving, like, you know, like an entire new dimension to what you've been building, and you need to let it go sometimes. I think it's important to trust the people you're working with.
So you have in front of you a crowd of starting entrepreneurs. So maybe whatever you would like to add or share.
No, I think that what is important is, again, like, to put when you start, especially at the very beginning, is put the values you believe in, whether it is from the product perspective, but also from HR perspective, from all perspectives, put the values on paper and try to stick with it all along your journey, because eventually they should be the north and the south of your, of your entrepreneurial journey. It's less about, I was telling Maeva prior to the meeting, it's never, there is no finish line, basically, right? It's always about the way, and there are like small victories, but there is never like an ultimate victory. Even when I was telling them, like, even when you're selling your company, eventually you get integrated in a bigger group, and then becomes another journey, right? And I feel that you need to be focused not on the finish line, but the way to get there, right? And it's always a marathon. So try to reiterate, pace your efforts, and always follow your guts when it comes to and the initial vision that you had. You can pivot, obviously, your product can pivot, but your values should never pivot. And I think that's really important, because eventually you're going to have to make tough choices on all different aspects. But if you stick with your values, then eventually it's going to be a great journey. It's going to be super fun. And whatever the outcome is, don't forget that, we're only talking about life here. So make the most out of it, right? Whether it is 6 months, whether it is 3 years, 6 years, 10 years. And I wish you obviously the best for the next for the next years and decades to come with your project. But whatever the outcome, it's gonna be tremendous, and a tremendous experience in general.